Nerd alert! Property Nerds, the home for data-driven property investors, where we uncover Australia's hot and cold markets, latest headlines and trends.
G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Property Nerds podcast. I'm your co-host Arjun Paliwal, CEO at InvestorKit Buyers Agency, and I'm joined by...
Jack Fouracre, Fouracre Financial.
That's the place.
Been here long enough, mate. You guys know me by now.
That's the one. We've got an exciting episode to talk about today. It's based on a lot of what's been going on in our businesses from what we're seeing and clients do. And I think by mentioning this and going through the scenario, we're going to help a lot of people avoid some costly mistakes, but also help some people absolutely nail. The topic today is about investing together with friends or family. And there's a lot to unpack there because it's something that's actually picking up a lot more in popularity. But mate, before we get into it, Jackie, I see you've been muscling up and beefing up a bit. How's training going?
Yeah, good, man. I started up at Gracie in Smeaton Grange end of last year. And me and my wife are going there like 3 to 5 times a week, depending on the schedule. But yeah, like even we get some stuff planned on a Saturday, and I'm even pushing that back so that I can get training in. I really got a goal this year. I want to get my blue belt, so just been taking heaps of creatine and training a lot. Yeah,
I was going to ask, man. I was thinking because as soon as you said Gracie's and Smeaton, have you run into Robbie Whitaker a couple of times?
Yeah, man. Shook his hand as well.
There you go. Was it the hardest handshake you felt?
Jacob Malcoon has a pretty hard handshake, but I don't think they roll with the white belts. I think they're all black belts. Like they're pretty chill, but yeah.
So a few more belts left, and then you will hopefully be rolling with the boys.
It'll take a few years, I reckon.
Well, that's good, mate. That's good. Well, I mean, I thought I'd jump into that, but also ask you. You see it a lot, investing with friends and family. And I know people don't know this until they know this and are in front of the actual calculators and financing side of things.
Yeah.
What is the thing that very few people know about when it comes to investing with friends or family?
Yeah. And it's a shame that we don't get to speak to them before they do it. Quite often they've already made the decision and are coming to us with a situation like that. So mostly how it's treated is if you own 50% of a property with a third party, that's not going to be a party to any future application. Vast majority of lenders are going to take the entire debt, but only 50% of the rental income.
Oh.
So it's, there's 2 or 3 lenders who will take half the debt and like half the rental income and kind of balance it out. But then you're pigeonholing yourself into those 3 lenders and with even those options, the other applicant that you're kind of excluding, they've got to prove that they're earning an income. So then you're also victim to their circumstances at the time.
Oh, man, that's a killer. We got to unpack that a bit. And I love doing this with an example, right? If you have $1 million property that you're buying together as a group of friends or even just family, you and a brother, you and a sister, or anything like that. So that $1 million property, say it rents for $750 a week.
Yep.
So firstly, on that $750 a week, when you're going to apply for a new place, now let's just say you and your brother bought a place together. Now you want to go for you and the missus. And you and the missus are buying a separate place. They're going to assume that $800K loan, if you have an 80% loan against $1 million, is all in your name when you, for your calculations, go to buy a property with you and the missus. Because that loan with you and your brother was $800K together.
Yeah.
But instead of assuming $750 rent a week, they're only going to assume $375 a week on the cash flow, right? That's horrible. You're already back against the wall. Now, quick side note, you know how banks calculate gearing on a loan?
Yeah.
And that gives you a bit of boost in your borrowing capacity because of negative gearing. Does that mean they half the negative gearing calculations on that loan because you're only half owned?
You're only half on title.
But you got the full debt on your name.
Yeah, and it gets worse. It gets worse.
So I think you're going to say it gets better, but it gets worse.
No. So if you've got that, you've got that property owner with a third party, you've managed to avoid, like go down that pigeonhole of lenders and avoid having that problem and buy a property portfolio with your spouse as significant other, then you've got, all those properties there. If you ever want to go and access the equity from the property you own with the friend or family member, you've got to go onto the application with them. And you at that point, you won't have a co-borrower and you can't actually bring a co-borrower into it when you own it with a third party. So you don't even have the borrowing power as an individual with that third party while still disclosing all the debt that you have with your spouse. So you're not even going to be able to get equity out of that property.
Right. So not only do you stuff yourself up in that first example we gave, but then when you expand debt with your spouse and you come back to get equity from the first one, it's made harder because the spouse debt's looked at differently too now.
Yeah. So all roads lead to selling it, right? All roads lead to selling it. And it's if they got the right advice from the get-go, they would have been prepared for that initially and say, look, we have to get this together. We don't have the borrowing power. We're doing it together, so we limit our risk and we just want to do it together. And one day we're going to sell it and go our separate ways, right? Yeah. If they knew that initially, it would be a lot easier for them to make the decision when all roads lead to, we should probably sell it. But when they get to that point, and quite often one person wants to sell it, the other person doesn't. And what happens then is nothing. Like if one person wants to sell it, the other person wants to keep it, they can't do anything, right? Or if the person that wants to keep it, they can buy out the other person, but then there's other complications and disputes there. So again, nothing happens.
Absolutely. And so now what you've also touched on is that you now are trying to plan for a new scenario you didn't think of initially. Yeah. And disruptions to plan always paralyzes people because you're like, get stuck, not sure what to do. But you see, one of the big things that I'm picking up there is that the lending on the front end, firstly, you're mucking that up down the track. The second part is you're lending if you have spouses and things come into the picture, you're also impacting there. But let's just say you're someone that goes, but there's a few banks that can do it. People miss this point. The advantage to scaling a portfolio is that you have as many banks as possible in your pool to select so your broker can work your magic. And that's how you guys do it for people. You're able to work your magic out to go, we've got a full pool. Yep. But if a customer's coming to you and you're going, well, because of the situation, I can't get you that magic strategy with another bank. I can't get you that refinance and an equity because it might only be 3 or 4 lenders now out of your 30 or 40 lenders that suddenly go, we'll acknowledge them with their half ownership, half income, half debt. Yeah. And that's a nightmare for a portfolio.
You're still going to run into those other issues though. Yeah. So, and people say that, you do it to minimize the risk, which is basically just having less repayments attached to it. But what about the risk of opportunity cost? When you've got all this equity tied up in a property that you can't use, that's a risk, So basically what we're getting to is if you're in a position where you're about to make a decision like that, there are things that you can do to mitigate your risk and certain structures that you could implement. So looking at like if you're purchasing with family specifically, you can buy in a family trust with a corporate trustee. You can own 50% of the trustee company each. Then the debt attached to that property is going to be not against your personal name. It's kind of just in a company structure. Yeah. You'll avoid the full debt being expensed and half the rental income. You'll avoid that situation, but you'll still run into the problem of having a portfolio outside of that and then having to go and do a trust application to access the equity and having to disclose all of your other properties. So you're still going to run into that issue. But at least then when you sell it, there's some flexibility with minimizing capital gains as well if it's in a trust.
Yeah, and I think with the trust as well, again, you'll open up more options of banks now because it's not just going to be the first batch of banks only that do that that separation of the personal name debts, but you have more banks now from not only the separation there, but you also have more banks that may exclude some trust-based debts, right? Yeah. And so I think now you not only get to have more choice, but you also get to have like full exclusion down the track as the property becomes positive. Yeah. And so I think these things allow that. But the other thing is, and that's assuming your accountant gives you that advice and everything makes sense, right? But the other thing is, I want to mention strategy. Where I've seen it work well is that those who commit to the journey for a long term, and when I mean long term, I mean it's not just purchase one with a bunch of mates. So I'll give you an example. I've got a bunch of 3 boys that have made purchases together. Mm-hmm. Now, where I feel it works for them is they're actually not planning on purchasing any properties personally. And they just want to do it with it's like this blood brothers, 3 good mates, they're really close as it gets. And they've purchased one with us in Brisbane some years ago that did really well. We then are taking equity out of that and going to the second purchase with them. And then diversifying that, but we're still, utilizing that same trust. We're utilizing the 3 guys together. And then we may look at separate trusts down the track. Yeah. But the thing is now they didn't just commit for one purchase because they thought it would be cool. That's the strategy where people stuff up. Oh, it'd be cool. Yeah, me and my mates, we've been thinking this. How good would it be to secure this property? Thinking that, now because we're getting this type of property, we're getting returns that you just don't get elsewhere. That's not the case. It's just a different dollar figure.
Yep.
And then they just go, all right, we've done one. Do we really want to keep doing more? That's where it goes wrong. Where friends like that continue to do more and more and more and almost feel like they're putting a fund together to build a portfolio and get access to more options rather than each one going, I can only buy 300 or 400K property each. They're together going, we can buy 800K to $1 million multiple times over. Yeah. That to me is where it works. And I think that's something people got to be conscious of, is that if you're going to do something like that, proper commit to it. Think of your exit strategy. Think of how you're going to get out of something like this. Not just think of it's a one and done and we'll go and do our own things, because you find doing your own thing gets harder.
All right, let me put my finance hat on for this, right? So I think that right now that would be the exception to the rule.
Correct.
But in most cases, because property is a really long-term investment, right? If you've got 3 separate individuals, they're all got 3 separate households, right? So from a lending perspective, it's not looked at favorably when you've got 3 separate households.
From an expense, because you've got 3 expenses there.
3 separate household expenses. You've got spouses, dependents. You've also got 3 individuals that might not end up in the same place on a 5-year scale or a 10-year scale. So you might have people that are weighing down the performance of the trust from an income perspective and a serviceability perspective. So you might not be able to grow as a result of somebody's income being lower.
Yeah, and their household, their living expenses. It's 3 verifications now, right?
Yeah, income, growth, all that. And then you've got a situation where, they can go out and do their own thing, but they've got all this wealth tied up in the trust. And to access the equity in that trust, they've got to do an application with all 3 separate households. And then there's a risk there. There's a long-term risk there. So I would say if it's not with family and it's with friends, it wouldn't be a family trust, it'd be a unit trust. And obviously not financial advice, speak to your accountant.
Yeah, but multiple different trusts, get your guidance on which one suits.
100%.
But what you've touched on there is perfect, right? Because what it leads to is that, yes, it's tougher for those boys when you're looking at servicing from all angles. But the good news is when they do come together, they've come together with thoughts and scenarios. Hey, if we get to this point, are we going to exit? When do we want to exit? How long are we doing this for? Let's commit with each other for multiple purchases. And so I think that's the big ingredient here, is that people should use this podcast episode to go, wow, I didn't know the debt issues that come from it and how it blocks me. Oh, I didn't know that I come down to only a few lenders. Okay, great. I can use structures to better it, but I got to be mindful of how many households we've got and which direction all 3 of us are going in. And then lastly, most importantly, now that you're aware of all that, if you're going to commit to it with 3 things in mind. Awareness around lending impact. The second thing is a timeline mutually agreed to everyone. And the third thing is an exit strategy.
Yeah.
What scenarios do you exit in? Certain things coming up between you 2 or 3, certain things coming up with goals that come up and you're aware of it that you're going to have to exit. A timeline based or a monetary based, once we make X amount, we exit. The main thing is you don't just go into it because it sounds cooler, you can get a bigger purchase price. You've got to go into it with that division.
Yeah.
And finally, the right or wrong type of structure with your accountant could be the difference in how the bank looks at it. Like you said, family or unit trust as an example.
And buying it in that structure makes the exit look much better in terms of paying less capital gains, being able to distribute it out. So a classic situation would be you've got a low income earner, 2 low income earners, 60, 70K each, right? They can't go out and buy a property for 800K individually, but they can together. So the capital growth on an asset like that, if they're going to hold it for the long term, 5 years down the track, maybe their incomes look vastly different. They can sell off the asset, distribute the capital gains, and start fresh from a much better place. So that's a classic example of how it could work.
Absolutely. Now, one final scenario to give to everyone is something we've seen business owners do a fair bit. So there are business owners who will be co-directors and they'll be scaling up a business and then they get surplus profits and they want to put it into property. Now, when they want to put it into property, they get distributions from that business over to a separate company called a bucket company, and they're trying to reduce it to going into their personal names for higher tax rates in their personal versus this bucket company. And then they use that bucket company as an investment vehicle to go and buy assets in. Now, this one has some borrowing capacity implications, but not as much as those first scenarios that impact them personally. And also there is the strength of a business income too, and it's sitting as part of the business structure, so that helps. But the main thing is most people in this scenario, again, are going down with an exit strategy. If we need to sell, if we need to get that capital growth out, they're not constantly looking to leverage. I find when we help business owners this way, they're using their business cash as a deposit. So they're not constantly going into equity, and they're buying commercial properties because they have business cash that's surplus. They're saving on tax and they're putting it into a bucket company for investing. And then they're having 30% deposits that aren't coming from, equity. It's actually coming from cash in business. So the cash flow becomes worth it for them. So if you start looking into those things with your accountant, ask them about, hey, how does a bucket company work if we've got surplus profits and we want to look at potentially investing? Second is have a chat to Jack and their team. We do lots of commercial and business owner support. And with regards to that, they'll help you look at the borrowing capacity impact of those separate companies attached for investing purposes only. And the third part, more important, the common theme through this whole episode is get your strategy right, because you need to think of exit strategy whenever you're investing with someone else that isn't your spouse or isn't yourself. And that's the way I always look at things. So, Jack, when it comes to these finance arrangements for those people that might be stuck in terms of like the situation and having different parties on a property, or they're about to go down this decision, they just want to make sure they're getting it right and know the implications, how can people reach out to you?
So it's fouracrefinancial.com.au. You can book a link in directly from that website, and I'll speak to you soon.
Awesome. Well, mate, it's been good catching up on this episode. Remember, property, everyone, is a game of finance. Jackie and I talk about that all the time, hence why a lot of finance flavors have started coming into the show alongside our research elements as well. And on another episode coming up, we're going into a lot of commercial because these two requests that we've had, today's episode was all around people that have been increasing in number count of how many people are doing stuff with friends or with family to get further ahead or boost up their position and get more choice. We just want to make sure you get it right and you don't go down the mistakes. So speak to Jack and his team at fouracrefinancial.com.au and see you on the next episode. We'll be chatting some things commercial and looking forward to getting into that.
Game over.